Hello from Kure, Japan, a lovely little port town that is just outside of Hiroshima. As you can see, this is amazing. There's a lot of sun around, which is why I got my glasses on. I am not taking these off. I am so sorry. You'll have to deal with the reflection and, well, I don't know if you can see it from there. I can't even see it, but that's okay. That's fine. So I wanted to make this quick little thing to tell you all about my time at the Nintendo Museum, which was a thing I was very fortunate enough to be able to get into because it's actually kind of difficult to get into right now. So for those who don't know, to get to the Nintendo Museum, you need to also enter into a lottery. And the way the lottery works is you just kind of, you pick 3 dates and times. So I was lucky enough to pick, say, Wednesday at about midday. I tried to go for a Thursday because I wanted to be kind of the last thing I did, but you know, I was lucky enough to get what I got, so I'll take it. And yeah, you kind of have to enter into one of those to get in. Like, you can't just buy a ticket. You have to kind of enter in for a chance to buy a ticket, which I know for some people might not be an ideal experience, but look, I think it works out for reasons we'll get into in a little bit. The other thing you should know is that if you do end up going ahead and buying a ticket for this, you do also need to have a way to call a Japanese phone number. So part of the verification process to ensure that you are who you say you are, you're not like a scammer, is you need to call a phone number based in Japan. So I was caught out by this. I was lucky enough that my provider actually does let me do that, but if you have no way of doing it, I would look into that, or at least find a way to make sure you can do that before you go ahead and enter into this thing. So a lot of my time spent at the Nintendo Museum was the main museum building. There's 2 buildings you can go into. There is the main museum building, but also the workshops where you can go ahead and make your own custom Hanafune card decks. I didn't really get a chance to do that because you needed to book, and I wasn't super really keen on doing that. So I spent a lot of time kind of just exploring the museum. And truthfully, I think for most people, that's where the action's going to be. So there are 2 floors in the museum. The first one you go into is the 2nd floor, which is the main gallery space. And I should also mention going forward for a moment, there's not gonna be a lot of video about this particular area or even any photos, because they were very particular about what you can and can't take photos of, which is fine. It's a gallery space, you know. You kind of expect it for a lot of art museums and kind of places like that, so.
Hold up, wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Hey, hello, sorry, Future Jamie here. So the other reason why you can't take video or photo is because they have prototype hardware in there, which, yeah, that's probably the actual really big reason, aside from Japan being really weird about kind of copyright and stuff like that and permission. So yeah, that's probably the other reason. Sorry about that. Back to the video. So this part of the museum was just kind of my favorite because it was just a whole heap of just old Nintendo boxes, game consoles, and their entire history. Because for most people, I think they know Nintendo, they've heard the history that Nintendo's been around since the 1800s. They've been making playing cards, and then they've kind of made a whole heap of stuff until they got into kind of video games in, like, I think it was the late 70s, early 80s, and we go from there. So a lot of that was just kind of going through the history of this company and kind of seeing just what they were involved in. And I like looking at old boxes. I like looking at kind of, you know, the many differences between kind of, say, what Nintendo used to do with the Famicom or Super Famicom boxes compared to what they do now. And it's kind of really wild to see just, like, you know, sure, everything's more universal, more uniform, but it's like, you look at an old Famicom box and it's like, this is really small and the art is really cute. And then you go to something like the Nintendo 64 where it's like the boxes become more, it is more vertically oriented, but the designs are really kind of just eye-catching and really kind of just striking. Like, there is a perfect dark box that Japan got, which is, I think, one of the most gorgeous kind of video game things I have ever actually seen. I kind of wish we got it as our cover, but, you know, different cultures, I suspect. But a lot of the kind of this space is dedicated to kind of showing the evolution of Nintendo as a company over time, and it's really fascinating. Like, unfortunately, kind of a lot of it is kind of lacking a lot of context. Like, for instance, you see a lot of old documents and kind of old kind of advertisements, and it's like, I don't know what this is trying to sell me. It kind of misses a lot of kind of information, which, I don't know, not really a fan of it. But if you look at it in terms of, like, kind of an evolution, it's kind of really fascinating. So I would say that part worth checking out at the very least. Once you're done with the gallery space, you go downstairs to the exhibition floor, and this is the thing that I was most curious to check out, if only because it was the one thing about the museum I was actually really keen to see how it works. So what this is now is a circular area of all these activities you can do which reference old Nintendo hardware, like not just like old games and old in consoles, but also things like the Ultra Hand or the Ultra Machine, these, you know, these toys that Nintendo made before they got into video games, but now just blown up and made into a much bigger deal. So for instance, one of the things they have there, and one of the things I preferred, was the Ultra Machine, which is basically, it turns into kind of a glorified batting cage, which is interesting enough in its own right, but the way it works is that you're set up in this kind of this old Japanese kind of living room. So balls are being thrown at you, you bat them away, and there's stuff you can kind of hit to interact with. So for instance, one of the setups was, there's a television you can hit. You hit the television, it plays like a brief second of the commercial for the Ultra Machine, but you also get like points to go with it. So the way it works is that kind of, you have 20 balls, every kind of bonus thing you hit, you get like one extra ball. You get like a little one-up noise to go with it as well, which is great. It feels really, really nice and satisfying. But kind of the thing about the space that's really unique is that it's actually limited what you can do. So every ticket you get has 10 kind of play coins. You tap your ticket onto a space to kind of, log into a game, and you only have 10 coins, and every activity has a certain amount of coins you can use. So the Ultra Machine costs about, I think it's like 2 coins. There's like a little arcade you can play, it gives you 1 coin. There is like a light gun gallery you can take part in, which takes up 4 coins. The idea being is that you can't ever really do everything in the one space. You got to really kind of pick and choose as to what you want to do, which I don't know if I really like that idea. Like, basically I get it, like it's to kind of get people to, spend more money on more tickets so they can actually go ahead and do everything. But at the same time, it's like, well, for people living in Japan, it's like, okay, well, at most it's what, $100, maybe a couple hundred to get down here. It's not that big a deal. For someone like myself or most people around the world, it's like, well, okay, this is several $1,000s. I got to worry about accommodation. I got to worry about transport. Like, the costs are a lot more, which means that it can be a little stressful if you really think about it. But at the same time, it's like, well, realistically, you can do most of everything on that floor in the one go. So it's not that bad of a problem, but at the same time, I can get sort of why it would be a little bit frustrating. Basically, there's a long way of saying that even though I feel like this was kind of pitched, this feels like a theme park in sort of a way, it really doesn't. Like, a lot of Nintendo are already in the theme park business. There's one maybe, 40 to 50 kilometers away, which is really neat and really cool, but that's very mass market. That's very much kind of like, we are focusing on this one very, very, very specific thing, as opposed to like, this museum space, which is like, hey, we're making kind of these interactive exhibits based around things that are very core to our identity, very core to kind of our being. And and I think that's very much like, hey, stuff like the Ultra Hand or even the Ultra Machine, which was released in the 60s, is like, well, most of the people there would not have even been born when the Ultra Machine was a thing. Like, I didn't know it was a thing because it's like the first thing you do in the first WarioWare game. And that's really cool. And then like, cool, I get to experience this little thing. I get to kind of see how it all works. And I don't know, did I learn something? Maybe not, but I got to experience it, and I think that's still kind of really something. Though speaking of experiences, I'll tell you like a little story I had. So one of the things you have at the museum is this thing called the Big Controller. Nintendo have built these displays with these oversized Famicom, Super Famicom, Nintendo 64, and Wii controllers. And so the idea is you partner up with a friend or a colleague or whatever, and you go play through a bunch of old Nintendo games on these massive controllers. So I didn't get a chance to do all of it because I only really had one, but one of the things about it is that you can only really do it with a group. Like, you can't do it solo. Like, and there's no kind of single rider line, if that makes any sense. I was lucky enough that I got turned away. I'm walking away, and then a lady who's nearby is like, hey, I heard you got turned down. Do you want to partner up and do it? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. This seems really amazing and cool. And I ended up kind of partnering up with a random person. We played the first few levels of Super Mario Bros. On an oversized Famicom controller, and we had an absolute blast. It was kind of wild and unique. And Kim from Georgia, if you're watching this, I don't think you are. I'm hoping you have a great trip. Thank you very much for partnering up with a random Australian. I really do appreciate that. So yeah, that's the Nintendo Museum in kind of a very brief but also kind of rambling nutshell. I would say if you do get a chance to go, I would say take it. I mean, I wouldn't kind of base an entire trip around it because there's so much you can do in Japan that's I think it maybe not worth it in that regard. But if you happen to be in the area, if you know you're going to be around Kyoto, look, give it a go. Like, what's the worst that could happen? And worst case, if you don't get in, Kyoto is a beautiful city to experience, and you're not too far from Osaka either, so you can go have fun there as well. So yeah, Nintendo Museum. Do dig it. Thumbs up.